Okay, so let's just imagine for a second a world completely washed clean. It's silent. A massive judgment has just changed everything. We're going to dive into what happens next, how life and even hope can possibly start all over again.
So, really try to picture this. A world that's just silent. It's buried under this endless ocean. After a flood of truly cataclysmic proportions, there is nothing but water. And this isn't just, a disaster. It's the aftermath of a complete, world-ending judgment.
I mean, can you imagine being inside that ark, looking out at just endless water? It had to have felt like it was all over. No land, no sign of a future, just this crushing sense of hopelessness, not just for people, but for all of creation.
But then, you get this one little phrase that just cuts right through all that gloom and changes everything. Seriously, this is the pivot point for the whole story. It's the exact moment the narrative swings away from total devastation and starts taking those first, really fragile steps toward a new beginning.
Right, so the way this new world gets started, it's not actually because of anything Noah does. It all begins with this very deliberate act of divine memory. This right here, this is the real beginning of the world's comeback.
Okay, this is super interesting. The original Hebrew word here for remembered is zakar. And let me tell you, it is packed with meaning. This isn't like God just suddenly remembering something he'd forgotten, No. Zakar is an action word. It means God is now stepping in. He's actively going to fulfill the promise, the covenant that he'd made.
And this isn't some far-off plan. The action is immediate. The floodgates from the deep, they're closed. The rain that just would not stop, it stops. A wind starts to sweep over the earth. And just like that, the long, slow process of healing the world has officially begun.
But here's the thing, and this is so important. This recovery, it's not instant, not by a long shot. It unfolds on God's timeline, not on a human one. And this introduces a massive test of faith, which is simply waiting.
I mean, just try to wrap your head around that. For 382 days, that's more than a year. Noah, his family, and all those animals are stuck inside the ark. They're just floating on top of a drowned world with absolutely nothing to hold on to, except for a promise.
Yeah, this timeline really shows you just how slow this whole restoration process was. I mean, it's just incredibly slow. The ark lands on the mountains of Ararat, which you'd think would be this huge, exciting moment. And it was a sign of progress, for sure, but it's still months before they can even see the tops of other mountains. So that long, patient waiting, it just keeps going.
So you see, Noah had information, right? He could literally see the mountaintops. That's a pretty clear sign that things are getting better. But his faith, it wasn't built on what he could see. It was built on trusting God's timing. So instead of just throwing the doors open and rushing out, he waited.
All right, so after all that time just waiting, the story takes a turn. Noah starts to actively look for information himself. He starts to, probe the world outside to figure out if it's ready for life again.
And he goes about this in a really methodical way, almost like a scientist. First, he sends out a raven, then a dove, and not just once, but 3 separate times, waiting a whole week between each try. Each one of those flights was like its own little mission, revealing just a little bit more about what was happening out there.
And then you get the climax of his whole search. After all that uncertainty, all that waiting, the dove comes back, and in her beak is a freshly plucked olive leaf. This is it, the very first real, tangible proof that new life was actually starting to sprout from what was a dead world. I mean, just think about what that tiny little leaf meant. It wasn't just a plant, right? It was a message from a world that was being reborn. It was actual physical proof that God's promise to restore everything was real, that it was literally taking root and making a new world possible.
So eventually the dove doesn't come back. That's a sign that the earth can support life again. Noah takes off the ark's covering and he sees it with his own eyes. The ground is dry. But believe it or not, the biggest test of his faith is actually still to come. So he can see it's safe. The evidence is right there. It's undeniable. So what's his move? Does he just throw open the doors and yell everybody out? And right here, we see the absolute core of his faith on full display. His own judgment, based on everything he can see, is just screaming at him, "Go, it's time." But he hasn't heard from God yet, so he waits. Get this, he waits for almost 2 more months. He chooses to wait for a command over his own perfectly logical conclusion.
So when God finally gives the command, Noah's very first act on dry land tells you everything you need to know. It's incredibly revealing. It shows us that his salvation, this whole ordeal, was about way more than just surviving.
Yeah, he doesn't start building a shelter or looking for food. The first thing he does, he builds an altar. He starts with worship. His immediate reaction to this incredible rescue is just pure, voluntary gratitude. And that one act sets the foundation for everything that's about to happen. This new world is going to begin with God right at the very center of it all.
And God's response to this worship? It's pretty astounding. He looks at humanity and he's realistic about it. He acknowledges the truth, that people's hearts are still flawed. They're still inclined to do wrong. And yet, in this amazing act of pure grace, he promises he's going to preserve the world anyway.
So, the promise isn't that people are suddenly going to be perfect. That's not it. Instead, God sets up this constant, quiet rhythm in the natural world. Planting time and harvest time, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. And he makes that the permanent, unbreakable sign of his promise, of his faithfulness.
So this ancient story really leaves us with a powerful question, something to think about in our own lives. What if all the ordinary rhythms we totally take for granted, the sun coming up, the seasons changing, what if they aren't just nature? What if they're actually an echo of that very first promise? A quiet, daily reminder that we are remembered, and that even after the worst possible devastation, hope can, and absolutely will, begin again.